I'm going to call this special session to order. May we have roll call, please?
Mayor Truitt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Alton. Here. Councilmember Wolcott.
Here.
Councilmember Villanueva. Here. Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Woodard.
Here.
Councilmember Williams. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We move to call to the public. Do we have anybody from the public that would like to speak?
I do not have any forms filled out, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We'll close the call to public. And before we go to agenda item number 1, I'd just like to say that this is an unfortunate situation we find ourselves in, a special meeting called at the last minute without reasonable notice to council. As a result, we're missing one of our council people who's taking a trip to New York. We've had others that have had to cancel plans. It's an unfortunate decision. I think it has potential of minimizing the good work that this council has done in unifying, coming together on those important issues. I think that it clearly does not pass the transparency test. Our residents have a right to be aware of meetings that are going to be taking place, and meeting called hastily at the last minute is, in my opinion, ill-conceived. And so, therefore, I'll consider a motion to adjourn without consideration of the rest of the agenda.
So moved.
Motion, do I have a second?
No, you have a second.
I have a motion and a second. The motion is to adjourn this meeting without consideration for remaining agenda. Please cast your vote.
Excuse me, are we calling for discussion?
Mayor and Council, it's not a debatable motion.
Thank you.
I need Councilmember Woodard's vote, please. Can you try one more time, please, Councilmember Woodard? Thank you. Three yes vote and 3 no votes.
That is exactly what I was concerned would happen, is that once again this council finds itself at odds with one another over a situation that has already been agreed upon by the entire council, and that is a process that is to keep Mr. Coronado in his position till after the first of the year. No, sir. And also a process that was agreed unanimously at the last council meeting for hiring the chief of police. So we're in a very difficult situation, council, and after having two council meetings, 2 different occasions, June 24th, and then the last meeting where the council agreed on process to come back and reconsider a decision at the last moment is too bad. And I ask everybody to please maintain, and let's try and get through this. Mr. Alton.
You know, I don't take calling special meetings very lightly.
Well, actually,
Mayor, I have the floor, please.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
Thank you. You know, and basically what happened,
Mayor and Council, point of order. If you're going to continue, you need to call the first item. I would recommend that you call the first item and discuss the first
Clerk,
item.
would you read item number 1, please?
Consideration and possible action regarding the hiring of a city manager.
Thank you. Mr. Alton, if you will.
Thank you. This is not a time to pontificate. This is a time to get some city business done. At the last meeting, we had flipped the switch in order to find a police chief. It was my feeling, as well as Mike Woodard's, and that is that it's only fair to the new police chief coming in that we have a true in-place city manager. The only way that could happen, because we've been canceling meetings because of dinners and so forth, the only way that could happen and not wait an additional 3 weeks is to call a special meeting. And I apologize that if John Williams was inconvenienced or anybody else on this dais was inconvenienced, but it is time to do the city's business. And one particular item that has been hanging, and that is, what do we do with the city manager? We're not here to discuss Mark Coronado. We're here to discuss the process. The process has already been determined. We are here in order to make a determination of flipping the switch and starting the search. That's all, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, and then my question would be, why, after the council there was unanimous consensus to address this issue after the first of the year, why are we calling this emergency special session?
Well, at that time, Mayor, we had a police chief.
So, sir, did you not agree with the vote that you made at the last council meeting that was unanimous on a process that was a very open process, transparent, and very inclusive of a lot of different groups within our community who are going to help vet the process and help select a new chief and come up with a couple of top recommendations? Are you reversing yourself on that?
No, I'm not. However, we have an open position. We need to get the city business done, and that is it's hiring a city manager. To have that city manager be in place prior to the placement of a city chief of police.
So
that process can continue. I would certainly hope that the community would be involved in that process. However, I believe that it is imperative that that person's boss, that would be the city manager, be not an interim, but a full-time designated city manager.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I just disagree, and I think that we thought about this, we deliberated on it, and we voted on it 7-0 to move forward into next year. I think we have a very effective city manager in place right now. He has had, and here I am I'm talking about Mark. Okay, forget what I said. We agreed on the process, and we agreed on starting the process to hire the police chief. It's a critical position, and I know it's your opinion, Vice Mayor Alton, that he needs to know who his boss is. I don't agree. There are many police chiefs that disagree with you. They don't care who the city manager is. And in fact, our last police chief went through 5 city managers.
Conversely, the assumption is that this won't have any negative impact on the city manager we want to get. And if we're going to go to a hiring process to get the best city manager possible, what does this say to that manager when we have a council that can't make up its mind, that makes a unanimous vote, and then 2 weeks later or less than, all of a sudden is reversing themselves, or at least a couple people are, and getting fired up over something that's already been agreed upon? Ms. Wolcott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I was not in attendance at that meeting where that vote was taken on the process for the chief of police, nor were you. But I was, as I think Mr. Alton explained, that I was out of town doing city business, and I do agree with moving forward with the police chief process, however it was not as a recorded vote. Nevertheless, I feel fairly strongly about the need for having a city manager in place prior to the actual hire of a chief of police. That is my personal opinion. And, we are not here to discuss or review the performance of Mr. Coronado. I think all of us have expressed ourselves in very positive ways about the performance of Mr. Coronado. But it's the title, the interim process, the not knowing, is what is of concern. And when we agreed in a consensus fashion to move what was initially supposed to be a very short-term process for the interim position, to then move it to start the process to the end of the year. At that time, we did not know that we were not going to have a chief of police in place. And so the playing field has changed. And Mr. Mayor, to be perfectly honest, and I know that Mr. Alton was not in attendance at a recent rather large town meeting in Sun City Grand, but the folks that usually spend a lot of their summers away are back, and they're very interested in what's going on in our city. And at a recent town meeting, there were 86 people present, and they were all wanting to know why we didn't have a process in place for our city manager and why we weren't moving forward. They felt that we should be having a city manager in place prior to the hiring of a chief of police. So I think Mr. Alton and I certainly are responding to our constituents who feel that a process that is as detailed as we have developed for our chief of police, we should have a process that is equally thoughtful and in the correct order for our city manager. So again, this is about process. This is about moving the city forward. This is not about setting us backward for certain. This is about moving forward and making certain that everyone is comfortable with who's in our chief position, our head management position in the city, which is of course the city manager. And again, you know, have I the opportunity to say the things that I'd love to say about our interim, I could speak volumes, very, very positive things. But that's not what this is about. This is about a process. And again, we agreed to a process. However, things changed because we did not know that we would be without a critical element of our city. And so this timeline actually that I see on our desks was actually requested by Mr. Hall and myself of the HR department on Monday. And so I'm confused that now we're not interested in the timeline, because this timeline clearly is developed for a date starting in November. And again, this was requested by Mr. Hall and by myself on Monday of HR, and so they were able to produce that. So I don't know what's changed since then. That was the last I heard from my conversation with Mr. Hall in a city manager's update meeting. So again, I don't understand the discomfort with this meeting, because it's about a positive process and bringing us together to bring forward the permanency to our city manager's position.
Okay, very, very good. Well, we will try to help you understand that. And it sounds like you're suggesting that there wasn't a plausible answer to your 86 constituents. And that's regrettable, because there is an appropriate response when people ask, what about the process? And that is that we have a process, and part of that process is stabilizing this body. And this is not about a particular person. This is about this council and its lack of ability to maintain a course, and to, while the questions may be valid, and I totally agree with somebody asking what's going on, what is the process. I agree with that, and I support that. Mm-hmm. But there's a plausible, there's a reasonable answer to it.
And I gave one, Mr. Mayor.
So
and I gave one, and I don't appreciate being dressed down by you for trying to answer my constituents. My constituents asked me a question, and I gave them a plausible answer.
Okay, I'm allowing you to cut in on my time here. The next thing a question I have is, why does two particular council people asking about a process mean that that does not mean that there's agreement by this council to follow a particular process? That's why it comes back to this body, and this body has already made a decision on that. Are you suggesting you don't agree with the process that was voted 5-0 on the hiring of a police chief?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all, Mr.
Okay, thank
Mayor.
you.
But what I am suggesting is that a discussion took place on Monday,
Monday? With
on
two
Monday,
people? Thank
between
you.
Mr. Hall, myself, and the city manager, and the HR department, and we requested a timeline. And the words of Mr. Hall were, as soon as possible.
Or a timeline?
As soon as possible to move forward with this process.
Okay.
And so
why
that
don't
is
we not
why
put-
it's
Why don't we not put
reflected-
words in somebody else's mouth, let them speak for
Well-
themselves? Mr. Villanueva?
Yes, we could go on and argue about this point. My point is that we did have a process in place.
Sorry, microphone. Can you check your mic, please?
Mike?
It's not on.
Other one.
We could sit here and discuss this all evening, but I think we have a process in progress. We follow this timeline, and as far as the police chief, I think we're advertising on that. Mr. Coronado gave a timeline, what he wanted to do, so I think that's in set, and I think we can hire a police chief in the meantime and follow the guidelines that we set up 7-0, and that's, I think.
7-0. Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree. I think we can also. Regarding our discussion that Councilman Walcott and I had with with Mark Coronado, there were a lot of things discussed, and I too I'm very concerned about everything, about this situation. I'm concerned that we lost the police chief, and I'm concerned about the police department and Mark Schott and the whole thing. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the city, very much so. Here's the thing. There are times where I think we need to reflect residents' will in our decisions. And there are times where we have to stand up and use our own best judgment to make a decision, okay, and explain it to our residents why we made the decision, rather than have them drive us to make a decision. And that's what I'm saying, Sharon. I think that the fact that residents are concerned, I don't have a problem with that. I get the same kind of thing from my constituents, people that come back into town and read the newspaper, et cetera, and get news on the back end. But we are more informed, Sharon, than our residents in terms of the inner workings of the city and what's going on in the city. And some of it is very confidential, in fact. So I think we were elected to make some tough decisions at times. And sometimes we have to explain it to residents why we made that decision. So that's where I'm at, and I'm comfortable with the process to go forward the way we've agreed on, and let it work.
Mr. Mayor?
Ms. Wilcott.
Well, first of all, you're right. We are elected to make decisions, and we do not take them lightly. And we also have to adjust to change, because things do change. The lay of the land change, situations change, and the business of the city changes. It's constantly in motion. Right now, I have a concern that what we're doing is trying to make some sort of a crucible out of a process. The reality is there's nothing wrong with moving forward and hiring a permanent city manager. It may be Mr. Coronado, it may be any other number of candidates that may be sitting out there that are interested in the city of Surprise, but we don't know that. The reality is we should be moving forward with the process. I firmly believe that. Times have changed since the day that we made that decision. We made it based on current information, the date that decision was made. When the residents of Sun City Grand attended a town hall meeting and they asked me a question, I explained to them that the times had changed and that I was not comfortable with moving forward with the hiring, the actual hiring of a city chief of police, without having a permanent city manager in place. That does not mean that we can't accomplish that without disrupting and disrupt the current process that was agreed to, which is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 5 months for the chief of police to hire the chief of police. And so there is really no reason why we cannot move forward with a process, and our interim still continues to do his good work during that process. We are still bringing in candidates, perhaps even the interim city manager as a candidate, and we can move forward with the hiring first of that city manager candidate, getting rid of that interim tag for a variety of very important reasons, and then hiring that chief of police, all of which can take place almost simultaneously, but there can be a few weeks difference between the hiring of the chief versus the hiring of the city manager. And so I happen to believe that. I understand that, and my understanding of our conversation was that you did too, Mr. Hall, because that's why this timeline reflects starting on 11/2, which I believe is very shortly. And so that is why this timeline was constructed as soon as possible at the direction of you and I in the city manager's office on Monday. And so I'm not putting any words in anybody's mouth because it's reflected by this piece of paper that was directed to the HR director.
Yeah, well, we really can't give direction, Sharon. I mean, we talked about it, and April accommodated our thought process in terms, but we didn't give a direction that we can't do that.
No, Mr.
You know, it was just you and
Coronado has
I.
to direct.
It takes Rich and Roy and Lynn and Mike and John and everybody else. We're a team on this thing. So we talked about it, and we talked about a lot of things, and April accommodated a timeline. If we made that decision, here's the timeline, and then we can look at it and see where we're at. But we didn't give we can't give direction like
No,
that.
you're correct.
I don't think anybody argues that process is important. In fact, I've hung my hat on that on many occasions, including the process that wasn't followed when we removed the last city manager. There was no process. And once again, we're deviating from process because we're eliminating the most important voice of all, and that's our residents, by calling a special meeting on an item that certainly could have been easily agendized and fully noticed so that all who wanted to come and share their thoughts could have. But we've circumvented that, and we've taken that voice away from the people, and that is not a good process. Mr. Woodard.
I agree with Sharon and Richard that when we originally started this process, we didn't know that we would be without a police chief. And I believe that it's inherent to us to get a police chief or a city manager as quickly as possible. It's been alluded to that by calling this special meeting that we're not showing the resolve to follow through with what was decided several months ago. But I believe it does show the fact that we have the resolve to adjust to current situations when they occur. And that's just as necessary as following a resolve that may not be applicable anymore. I wish this meeting hadn't been called, but in order to meet the 11/2 deadline, we did, because a meeting next week was canceled. So those were the slim choices that we had, and that's what we did. I believe it's behooving to this council to resolve to move this forward, get this situation and get this process started. There's no change in the process. The only change that we're doing is changing the time frame. And the time frame is being changed because of incidents that occurred after we had made the original process dates.
Well, unfortunately, because of this hastily called meeting, we've eliminated the voice of an entire district. And that's because that particular council person had major plans that couldn't be changed. And so this is not a process that serves the people, folks. This is maybe a process that follows certain special interests, but clearly not one that follows the interests of the people. And therein lies my objection. Mr. Alton.
Mayor, I totally disagree with you. We are doing the citizens' business here. Unfortunately, it had to be called early because it was such a, I mean, if we're going to appear on this next council session, then it would have been 3 weeks from now, I believe. And it just takes 3 weeks out of the process. I mean, it's not, we can't do that. However, Mayor, may I go back into the corporate world a little bit, and I believe municipalities work the same way. This whole idea of moving it until the decision or the process until the first of the year was that we could come and be a cohesive city council. Cohesiveness starts with the CEO. And I don't foresee that in the next 2 weeks, I don't foresee in the next 2 months that we're going to have a council that is going to agree with one another.
And unfortunately, I totally thought we were moving in a unified direction, working on strategies in order to accomplish the main goals. So this comes as a surprise that this would be sprung upon this council by 2 of its members. Ms. Wolcott.
I don't think I was done yet, Mayor. But you do have the capability of, I guess, commenting about anything that anybody says, being the chair or the presider of this council. This is, I have no idea why we would want to wait until January unless there was something in the offing, unless we were, or people were preparing somebody to run, or that person was going to become available after January. I don't know, but I don't see that there's any difference between November and January. I think if we can get our legwork done, I think if we can get the process started, then us as a council can come to the agreement and the vote of bringing somebody on. Yeah. But I can't see what 2 months difference makes. Yeah. For the life of me, unless somebody's got their own hidden agenda.
Yeah.
Ms. Wolcott.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I think that the purpose of this meeting is just exactly that, to do the people's business. The people are wondering, why is it taking so long? Why do you have an interim city manager for so long? And yes, we did agree that because of the need to settle the organization, which Mr. Coronado has done a magnificent job of doing over the last several months, because of that need, we agreed that we would put it off until the end of the year. But putting it off and then starting the process at the beginning of the year, then that takes us into March or April before we would actually hire a city manager. But then again, I do remember that Councilman Villanueva also mentioned the fact that
why don't we not put words in people's mouth and let Mr. Villanueva speak for himself, please?
I'm just recalling the conversation that took place at this dais.
That's recollection. I would suggest you keep it to your own thoughts.
Point of order. This is the wrong time, Mayor, to draw a line in the sand. If Ms. Wolcott has the floor, I think it is totally inappropriate for you to interrupt. Therefore, Ms. Wolcott, would you please proceed?
Actually, sir, you called for a point of order, Mr. City Attorney. Are you recognizing that there is a point of order here to consider?
There has not been an inquiry of the parliamentarian, so no, there's nothing for me to comment on.
Thank you.
May I have the floor?
I believe I had the floor. Thank you. Issues were raised at this council table, and I won't identify the individual who raised that issue, but the issue was, why would we want to wait until the first of the year? We are now moving into an election year, where our 4 members of this body will be up for election. That politicizes the process.
Right.
If we move forward with this process of hiring our city manager now, we can avoid the politicization of that hire. And I think that piece of advice was well stated at the time, and I believe to this day that it would behoove us to follow that advice. There's no question that we are in need of settling an organization more so at this table than we are with our city employees, because Mr. Coronado has done a magnificent job of bringing our employees together. But we need to move forward, and we need not to make the hiring process a part of the political process of 2011. So that is one of the reasons why I support the efforts of Mr. Alton and Mr. Woodard to try to move the process that we all agreed to is very critical, that we move forward at this juncture right now, get started, let's bring in the candidates, and let's see who wants to rise to the surface, and let's see who wants to talk to us about being our manager, and then let that individual be part of the hiring process of our new chief of police. I don't think that there's anything outlandish or some sort of a secret motive behind doing just that.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you not recognize that when we talk about the stability of the organization, that this meeting in itself and the decision that potentially could come out of a meeting like this could really destabilize the organization and undo the good work that has been done most recently by our selected interim? That's an important part, is we were getting there. I thought we were getting there as a council. I know the staff was getting there, and people were recognizing that this is a team and that we're all part of the team, and we have our own roles. This certainly seems to change that. Mr. Hall.
Mr. Was that a question or was that a rhetorical question? You asked the question to me, do I not realize? May I respond?
It was not rhetorical. You may respond.
I happen to disagree. And because I disagree does not mean that I disrespect your opinion. The fact that I disagree with your opinion that us standing together in front of an audience full of people, this is pretty typical size actually, and it will be televised. I happen to think that doing the people's business is why we were elected. We're here to make some tough decisions, and that means we also have to be flexible. And I don't think that calling a meeting in order to accommodate the changing landscape is the wrong thing to do. I think it's part of our process. It's legal. It's identifiable in our ordinance as a procedure that council members can take in order to express a certain urgency. And I think that's exactly what Mr. Alton and Mr. Woodard have done. And so, frankly, I'm happy to be here doing the people's business. I'm disappointed that we've been having so many weeks between meetings because of so many cancellations of meetings to do the people's business over the last month particular. And I know of no other city that has canceled so many meetings in the fall like we have. And so I'm disappointed about that. I know that's for another discussion for another time about how we might be able to change that. But the reality is, for this purpose, in order to accommodate the changing landscape and the need to do the people's business, I think it was perfectly appropriate and certainly not damaging. And I don't understand why you would think that coming before us, all the 6 of us, and I'm sorry that Mr. Williams was not able to be here, but it's not unlike my inability to be where I was planning on being here last week, too, if the meeting had originally been planned for that date. But as you know, things move. And so I had other plans for last week, but they were also city business. So we are trying very hard, I think, all of us are trying to do the people's business here, Mr. Mayor. And the fact that we disagree does not mean that we disrespect. And so I think it's a leap, and it's unfortunate that you would start the meeting with that premise that because we disagree that we are somehow not getting along. The reality is we have an honest disagreement, I think, at this stage of the game. And I, for one, am here to vote in favor of a process that we all agreed to back at the beginning of the year, and that we are simply moving it forward by a few weeks in order to take it out of the election year politics of 2011. That's all.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, there's a few points I'd like to make. One is this timeline that April did for us. Okay, we're starting right now. This timeline has March 10th as a mayor council action to hire a city manager. Okay, that's in 2011.
Correct.
That's in an election year.
Correct.
What's the difference between March and May or June? What is the difference, Sharon? I don't see any distinctive difference. You're going to be in the political year of re-electing 4 council people, or a mayor and 3 council people. Okay, so I don't see the difference. The thing is that we have a process. Vice Mayor Alton says we're voting on we need to have a process. We've got a process.
Right.
Yes.
Our process, we voted on 5-zip last week. Okay? Now here's what bothers me about this. See, you need to understand this, Sharon. It's nothing personal for any of you guys. But it's suspect to me when you're out of town, okay, and the mayor's out of town, and the 5 of us, Rich, Roy, John, Mike, and myself, vote 5-zip on to move forward for April to hire the consulting firm out of Colorado. We have a public meeting, we discuss it, we go through it, blah, blah, blah. We vote 5-zip to move forward. Why wasn't this discussed at that point? Also, it could have been agendized.
Well,
you knew it was going to be on the agenda. It could have been agendized, all right? So this is suspect. We just did this last Thursday.
Well, if I may, if
Okay.
you're asking the question,
All right.
I actually brought the issue up after the town meeting to the city manager. I did bring the subject up.
Okay, well that's fine, and that's your right to do that, Sharon. I'm not saying that. It's just suspect that all of a sudden after we get on, all of us get on board 5-zip, we have this big special meeting, and we got to change the process. Okay?
We're not changing the process.
Well, yeah, you are, and because we agreed 7-0 to wait till after the first of the year, okay, for the city manager. And now it's, well, the landscape has changed, or we got the will of the residents, or whatever it is, all the buzzwords we use, but we want to change something we all agreed to, and we call this big special meeting to go through this. Here's the thing. Let's keep it simple. Can we keep it simple? You know, the KISS formula? Let's keep it simple. You and I disagree, and Rich and I disagree, and Mike and I disagree, that a police chief needs to know who his boss is. Period. That's where we disagree. All the rest of this is just rhetoric. We disagree on that. Okay? I don't happen to think that a police chief needs to know who exactly the city manager is going to have to be to apply for this and be an effective chief of police.
May I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Well, isn't that what we disagree on? That's what we disagree on.
It certainly the
rest of it is all.
It seems so today. It does not reflect a conversation that you and I had earlier in the week. So somehow earlier in the week you had a different opinion, Because that's...
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I
Well,
was
all right.
talking out loud, Sharon, because this is a very serious subject.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and that's why we brought April in to be part of the discussion.
Correct.
And she gave us some information and her take on it, and I respect her. And so there's more to this. But that's really what it boils down to is what we disagree on.
It's a simple disagreement.
It's a simple disagreement. So
you're
let's
correct.
try to keep it simple without just getting all,
I agree, Councilman Hall. I agree, and had only our meeting kind of gotten off on that initial footing, I think we probably would have been better served, all of us. But that being said, it is an honest disagreement.
Yeah,
It's likely to be a 3-3 disagreement this evening.
Right.
Nevertheless, I think that it is important to let the people know that that's what we're thinking. I think it's important. And certainly the press will certainly let the people know that this is an honest disagreement between 3 council members and 2 council members and a mayor. So, I can accept that. I can accept an honest disagreement. I just struggle when we have other pieces that are injected into the motivation behind this meeting, because the reality is the motivation behind the meeting for Mr. Woodard and Mr. Alton are very clear. It's a concern for the business of the city.
I understand.
And simply nothing more. And so I'm sorry that anything other than that was
My simple disagreement is the way in which you say you want the residents to know what we're thinking, then why not do it on a regular agendized meeting at a regular meeting time when the people would expect to tune in or to come down and hear what we're thinking.
And again,
To do
Mr.
it
Mayor,
at this late,
had we not canceled so many meetings, it would have been agendized by now.
So what has changed since the process was agreed upon in principle by the majority of the council, 5-0? What's different? That was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's two different. You're talking about two different pieces here.
A week ago. Oh, excuse me, a week
It's
ago.
a week ago tonight, I believe, and both you and I were out of town, Mr. Mayor. But those are two different pieces. I mean, the reality is, I brought the issue up to the city manager probably right around the time of the League of Cities. At the League of Cities, I did bring it up. So I've brought it up before. And it came up again at my town hall meeting, and I reported back to the city manager that it did come up at my town hall meeting, that there was a concern on the part of the residents about that, about the order of things. And so I shared that with him at one of our meetings. And so, again, had there been more opportunities to meet and do the people's business in this building and in this room, I certainly would have enjoyed the opportunity to have this discussion at a regular meeting night, which, by the way, this is a regular meeting night. It was canceled for a tennis tournament. And so, actually, Mr. Woodard and Mr. Alton just actually returned us to a normal meeting night. It just happens to be bumped up earlier.
You're absolutely correct. The time, of course, is 2 hours earlier.
Right.
So as far as I can see, Councilwoman, the thing that's changed is last week when the council 5-0 agreed with the process, they heard how it was laid out before them. They all agreed. The only thing that's changed, apparently, is that you weren't here to voice your objection to that process, and so now we're dealing with this special meeting.
Mr. Mayor, you're putting words in my mouth. I did not object to the process.
Actually, I didn't put words in your mouth. I was making an observation based on the discussion that's taken place.
You asked me specifically if I agreed with the process that was agreed to by the council last week, and yes, I do. If I had been here, I would have voted yes, but we would have had a conversation about shouldn't we get the business in order if the parliamentarian would have allowed me to even bring it up, because it was a non-agendized item. Again, I have attempted to have that discussion with the city manager in the past several weeks, actually since the league. And again, had there been an opportunity to put something forward on the agenda, I would have certainly had that discussion. But again, we had so many meetings that were canceled. I believe one was for the Benavilla dinner. I believe one was for the GPEC dinner. Tonight was canceled for the tennis tournament. And again, I'm much more concerned about doing the city's business than attending those functions. Today, we are here at 4 o'clock because there is a tennis tournament that we are hosting here this evening, and certainly we would all like to go to the tennis tournament, I'm sure. But there's nothing wrong with us having this discussion on a regular council night, and perhaps maybe we need to think about never canceling meetings on regular council nights so that the public knows that they can tune in at a regular hour at 4 o'clock for a workshop and at 6 o'clock for a council meeting every single Thursday night, or 3 of 4 Thursday nights. But that's not what has happened. And I did not cancel all the meetings. I did not cancel all these meetings in October and all these canceled meetings in November and canceled meetings in December. And so that's what's changed is I set up my calendar at the beginning of the year of the things that I wanted to attend and go to, and I set them according to the regular meeting night being Thursday. The first, second, and fourth Thursday of the month are regular meeting nights. That's what the public expects, and that's what I expect as an elected official. So I set up my schedule. I set up my personal plans with my family all around those dates. And so when those shift, that limits my ability to put something forward on the agenda.
And actually, again, nothing's really changed because there was a process agreed upon by the full consensus of the council first of the year. And so this is, a last-minute power issue. Mr. Woodard?
Last week, we did not agree on a process in regards to the city manager, and that's what we're here to discuss tonight. Mm-hmm. Last week was a process for the chief of police, and I don't think we should be mixing these two items into one. They're two separate positions, they're two separate people, and two separate processes. And so it disturbs me to see a decision that was made last week for one position and one process is being brought into another.
Can I respond to that?
After Mr. Alt.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you, Mayor, for recognizing me. I agree with that statement, Michael, and that is that the mayor repeatedly today has confused, either on purpose or not, confused the issue of last week's meeting 5-0 timeline to approve the timeline for and the process for the chief of police, and what was decided only by a consensus, not by a resolution, a consensus when we had a chief of police in place, that this process be moved on in hopes that this council would play nice. Well, we can't confuse the two, and I know it's sometimes difficult, but we need to look at the process for hiring city manager and move on. We could stay here all night long and beat a dead horse.
Yeah, we can.
We all know how this is going to work out, but I want to go on record. I want to go on record saying I totally believe that we owe it to the city of Surprise to have a city manager in place. We relented. We moved on. We we agreed to extend it for maybe until the end of the year in hopes that this council would work things out. I don't know if that's possible. I'm willing, but what we've got is now we don't have too many more council meetings left before the end of the year. We've already turned the switch on for the search of the police chief, it is time for us to move on for our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, and perhaps I am confused. Having had no notice of this meeting other than the last-minute thing, I can only take what I read in the paper that you were quoted that this was about the police chief. And so that's why I bring up the police chief, because it seems that based on your quotes in the paper, that the underlying issue is your concern about the hiring process of a police chief, and that's why I continue to reference the agreement of a week ago. Mr. Hall.
Is it, can I call on Mark or April?
Let's tread lightly here, and I'm going to ask the city attorney to be listening closely.
I'm just wondering, the reason, Rich and Mike, is that these two kind of come together a little bit is because we as a council, I think, sent a message. You and Mike sent a message when he called this special meeting. I think you slowed down. I don't know if we've engaged with the company from Colorado. I think April's waiting. Are you, or what are we doing?
It has nothing to do with the chief of police.
Well, are we slowing down the police chief process by this meeting, Mark? What's the deal here?
No, the police chief process is ongoing. There is no delay.
Okay.
We have not been directed to delay, and until the council gives us direction to delay, we will move forward.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Alton.
I believe it's time to make a motion. I move that we start the process to hire the city manager.
Second.
Motion and a second. I believe there is, I don't think we need any, but I believe it is, discussion is appropriate if anybody would like to say anything further. Hearing nothing, please cast your vote.
Oops.
Wait. Can you cancel my vote here?
Yeah, mine too.
Okay, so a yes vote or a for vote is to move on with the process, and against vote is to stay the course and continue the process as agreed after the first of the year.
I hit the wrong button by mistake. Do you want to clear mine?
My light's not coming on. Can you just go ahead and,
Thank you.
Mr. Alton, do you mind restating your motion, and then we'll ask for a reset here.
I move again that we start the process to hire a city manager.
Second.
Motion and a second again by Mr. Woodard. Thank you. Please cast your vote.
I need a clearance.
Go ahead, it's clear.
Want me to help you?
Councilmember Hall and Woodard.
Yeah, mine's blinking, but
Try it one more time.
City attorney has suggested we do a roll call, and
That will be fine.
City Clerk, if you would proceed with that, please.
Mayor Truitt,
No.
Vice Mayor Alton,
Yes.
Councilmember Wolcott, Councilmember Villanueva,
No.
Councilmember Hall,
no.
Councilmember Woodard.
Yes.
That is 3 yes vote and 3 no vote.
Okay, motion dies because there isn't a consensus or a quorum or a majority. Is there any further business to be conducted here? We have an item 2. Mr. City Attorney, do we have a need to go to? Okay. This meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, April, for your work.